on to another Fireside chat, Bridging the IT Security Gap. And for our final session of the day, I'd like to welcome Kunal back to the stage. He'll be joined by Mike Orosz, CISO of Vertiv, for a fireside chat around bridging the IT security gap. Gentlemen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Shira. As promised, guys, I have got a special guest speaker with me. But before I introduce to him, let's recap what we have done today. So, as you saw in my session, I did discuss about the asset inventory and how the CIO and the CISO team are trying to build the asset inventory program with a different method and what kind of a challenges that they run into in terms of acquiring all the assets and then sharing the security contacts. But then wouldn't it be good to hear this directly from the practitioner? So with that said, let me introduce you to Mike Orosz. Thank you, Mike, for joining today the Q&A session. Appreciate all the time you are taking. Mike is a global CISO and chief product officer, chief product security officer at Vertiv Incorporation. The special thing about Mike is that he likes to drive things in a autopilot mode. Be it his new Tesla that he bought over a weekend and he drove in autopilot mode from a Dallas, Texas to his home state in Michigan, or running the various cybersecurity program in his organization, be it a vulnerability management or a patch management program, but he likes to drive things in autopilot. So thank you, Mike, for joining. Welcome, and look forward to having an insightful conversation with you over the next 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Kunal. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to everyone about how we're doing things. And while might drive the car and try to drive it in autopilot, I'm more of an automation kind of guy when it comes to cybersecurity because I fully believe automating some of the menial tasks is the key to scaling and becoming proactive and more effective with cybersecurity.
Cool. Yeah. So let's talk about a lot of those automations and the autopilot and how you are bringing those practices at Vertiv. So to begin with, right, Mike? So when it comes to asset inventory, the different stakeholder has a different business driver. And to begin with, right, what is your thought on what are the different business drivers for building the asset inventory program in a particular organizer, any enterprise organizations or any SMB, SME?
That's a great question you asked, Kunal. And you're absolutely right. Every stakeholder group within any organization has different motivations and concerns and needs with regard to what they have to attain from their CMDB or their asset inventory. What's most interesting is from a cybersecurity perspective, the global cybersecurity leader and the respective teams that flow up to that leader have to have a clear sense of all the assets in the entire organization. In order to protect the organization as a whole, you have to protect every asset. You can't just exclude one because it's not relevant to you. Whereas in the business is worried about the things that make the business run. That that might be applications, that might be some particular piece of infrastructure, but generally the business doesn't know about the infrastructure that supports the applications it runs. And the same thing with an IT organization. You have many different roles in any IT organization, and generally those roles are focused on the specific jobs they have. And those jobs may only be a small piece of the pie or a fractional piece of what the CMDB is comprised of. Therefore, it all goes back to the cybersecurity lead or the team handling the CMDB in order to kind of bring all those outlying pieces together to meet in a coherent way.
Yeah, no, make total sense. And Mike, now that you talk about bringing everything in a one place, right? That is one of the key driver. But then we also hear from our other customers that there are some compliance mandate that the particular industry have to follow through. So how do you see those compliance mandate, right? Like for example, CISA or any PCI compliance, and how they are related to building the unified asset inventory.
I think it makes a lot of sense to consider compliance as a key component to your CMDB. Not every organization is going to have to be compliant with the same regulatory requirements, but one thing's for certain, you need to know where your crown jewels are located. And generally, they're sitting on a piece of infrastructure, whether it's in the form of a database, you might have to patch the database. You might have to patch the underlying infrastructure. You might have to patch the application that processes the data that's within the realm of that particular regulatory requirement. So I think that if you aim to have a healthy asset inventory, it's going to naturally translate into compliance.
Yep.
Now, how you prioritize the work you do to adhere to the compliance requirements, whether it be patching things in a certain period of time or whether it be protecting data in a certain way, that will dictate how you prioritize what you do first.
Yeah, no, make a lot of sense. And this compliance mandates often a time leads organizations to collaborate together and build an inventory, right? So now, Mike, when it comes to building the asset inventory, right, as you also rightly mentioned, the IT team is building via CMDB, whereas the cybersecurity team often a time rely on the cybersecurity platform that they are working through. So now, what we have heard from many customers is that building and maintaining the CMDB, which IT teams own typically, but then they see a lot of challenges there. So, what is your experience and what have you seen over your 20 plus year careers when it comes to CMDB, and whether you as a cybersecurity leader do you or can you rely on the IT owned CMDB, and what challenges you see there, Mike?
I think you can rely on it, but I'm going to say with a caveat, with an exception. You have to take an active role in making sure it's enriched because there's still a human component to all of this. I've never yet seen today or across my entire career a CMDB that assembles itself, that aggregates all the data without some kind of human intervention. And honestly, when assets are introduced to a network infrastructure, they have to be enrolled into the CMDB. They have to be added. But what happens when somebody shuts them down? Did somebody remember to take it off the books or to indicate whether or not it's running or not? Maybe that's really easy to see if you have a highly virtualized environment. But many corporations and organizations are still hybrid, where they're at some kind of limbo stage where they have some on-prem, some cloud, some PaaS, IaaS, things like that.
Mhm.
Varying levels of degree of accountability and abstractions of responsibility when it comes to detecting vulnerabilities and security issues. So that's why it's critical for the cybersecurity team to have some kind of integration where you can, one, uh, detect the problem on the device, and two, correlate that back to the CMDB and the asset owner. And what you may find is sometimes you have a detection, and by the time you get through to the adequate or the correct owner, you may find that the asset no longer exists. That's perfectly fine. I mean, large organizations with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of assets, it's a I call it like a city. Babies are born, people die, people move away, people get divorced, people get married, all sorts of things happen. But you have to realize this running a network is a very dynamic thing. And cybersecurity is also very dynamic. What was secure yesterday may not be secure today. And that's why having a very accurate CMDB, or as accurate as possible, is critical in the speed to response, that mean time to detect and remediate.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, you brought up a great point about having an accurate CMDB, right? And the more and more customers that we speak to, I think they run into very similar challenges that you said, right? I mean, when you are looking to find an owner of the asset and you see that, hey, asset itself is no longer exists, right? And this sort of, right, and often a time, as you said, when it comes to the inventory and a CMDB, you got to have all the assets, cloud, on-prem, IoT, OT, and often a time, right, building this in a CMDB with the traditional discovery method leads to sort of a gap of those we call it as a unknown assets, right, and that leads to
Correct.
perhaps elevated risk posture for an organization, right? Uh, so now, Mike, when we talk about the alleviated risk posture, and perhaps you being a global CISO and managing the product security for the large enterprise organization, right? So why don't you walk us through a risk-based prioritization that you have been practicing across the various cybersecurity program in your organization, and what are the key ingredients to implement those risk-based prioritization program?
So I'm going to say one word to start with, and it's context. And it's really business context, context to the data, the device, the location, and all that good stuff. So the approach I take and we take as a company is to leverage something called a business impact analysis. And
Mhm.
it's a business continuity and disaster recovery process where you send on an annual basis a survey to key people within a business, and it's their obligation to fill out a series of questions. What are the systems that keep the business running? What are the things that are critical to those business stakeholders, even if they don't know how to describe it in a technical way? That's okay. We first collect and aggregate all the things that are critical to all the business functions from the business people in their language. And then we translate that into applications, and then we translate that into the backend databases. And that's how we assign criticality, like the critical recovery window, which is 0 to 4 hours. So we assign that criticality rating, and in turn, we can then align those systems to, let's say, endpoints, to servers based on their geographical location. We can then scan and compile all the vulnerabilities as they arise, and we can then attribute it back to a business function. And then, based on the criticality of that business function and criticality to the business, we can then learn how to prioritize something that may be critical to the operation of the business and deprioritize something with maybe a higher criticality rating vulnerability, but is not critical at all of the business and the operation of it. Could just be some system used for a particular reason at a location that has no overall great value to the company, but it's still needed. Don't get me wrong, but is something that's less of a priority than something else. So you have to take it in the context of the business, what's critical to keeping the business running, and it's more of a business continuity and disaster recovery perspective. And then you have to tie it back to the vulnerability, and then you have to then prioritize remediation first to those assets that are most critical to keeping the business running.
Yeah, great point, right? And I think the one word that you use to describe this risk-based approach for the cybersecurity program, context, quote unquote, I think that's the key, right? And often a time the lack of the accurate and up to date CMDB leads to this context, right? And if you don't know the owner, the business functions, then as you rightly said, like how are you then going to know that what is important for your business, right? So no, I think that resonates very well across our customer base, that we see all the time that, hey, how do I know, how quickly can I assign to the right owner? Is it a critical, I got so many vulnerabilities to prioritize and patch it, and which one to pick it, right? So this is great point that you highlighted, Mike. Now one last questions that perhaps I have, Mike, is often a time these days we see that the attackers are leveraging the outdated systems, for example operating systems, or the softwares that are running in a organization, and especially the vulnerabilities that are associated with those outdated software and the operating system, and they look for exploiting those, right? So now historically, Mike, when we talk about end of life, end of service, outdated software and operating system, generally people think that, hey, it's IT function, right? But what we are learning from our customer is that, hey, it's no longer IT, because it's a cybersecurity team that needs to drive this. So could you please talk about how you, as a security leader, how you see this outdated system in your environment, and how do you drive those, collaborate with your IT team in making sure that you don't have those issue of outdated system?
Well, that's a great point, Kunal. And really, what you have is a situation where one group might do the hosting and supply the infrastructure. Another group might manage the application. A third group may have the business context, again, like we talked about a second ago, the contextual relevance piece. And one group may be hesitant to patch something because they don't have a working relationship with the other group who operates it, and they don't understand the time of day where they can apply the patch. And you know that when you patch most operating systems, you tend to have to reboot the host, which means that what are we going to cause an outage in a manufacturing site? Are we going to cause an outage with engineers who are going to be angry with us? What are we going to do? So what I've begun to do is start communicating and communicating prolifically. So on a weekly basis, we send out a newsletter where we aggregate all those systems by geography, by business function, by application, all this relevant stuff that you got to know in order to decide, again, what the priority is. And after a certain period of time, I just have to say it, you have to draw the line somewhere, and you have to demand that something gets fixed, particularly if it's at a high enough criticality level, because if it sits out there forever, eventually your number is going to come up and somebody's going to take advantage of it. And, while the business may not understand the justification for stopping everything and patching something, they will understand the negative consequences if somebody takes over and exploits something and destroys their systems and they're no longer usable. So I think communication is key. It's paramount towards fixing things, but also at the same time setting some deadlines. You know, you have to say what needs to be done. You have to partner, give them the tools they need to do it and fix it, remediate the issue. And then at the end, you have to hold people accountable. And that's really what it's about, whether it's you holding them accountable of them saying, hey, we realize there's a security issue with this. We want you to fix it. It's everybody's responsibility. This security thing is a team sport.
Yeah, fantastic. And then I think the point that you mentioned, like the newsletter, wow, like that's the amazing practice. And like you said, the you like the autopilot and the automation go together, and looks like you nailed it with the automation, where you have a weekly newsletter that you share with the various teams, with the owner, and go behind it to get it fixed, right? And I think this is where the cybersecurity team these days, we have started seeing the trend that the outdated system brings in a elevated risk posture, and they want to be on a top of the game, and they want to share that contextual information. And again, going back to your previous answer about which you mentioned, having the context plays a very very critical role, right? It is like, hey, when you say, hey, the finance department server where we have hosted a critical business application, now that is running outdated operating system, now that's a high business risk, versus running something on the server which is not being used.
Like
So
a dev server, a sandbox, or something like that. That's something we can discard.
exactly, great point, Mike. So now look, guys, as you saw, Mike has a very advanced and the mature practice of building and sharing the weekly newsletter, and he leverages our Qualys cybersecurity asset management. Now as you saw in my presentation, we are launching a special one-time free report for you guys to see your tech debt, which is your end of life, end of service, outdated system, and that you can share perhaps with your IT team, so that they can proactively plan upgrade. And what does that mean? If you have a latest version of the software and hardware and infrastructure running, powering your critical business application, that means more security, more secure posture, and lesser number of vulnerabilities to fix it, right? So thank you so much, Mike, for your time and sharing very insightful stories about how you are securing the Vertiv and the infrastructure. So thank you so much for your time, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Kunal. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you, guys, for listening in me and Mike on the Q&A session, and learning how organizations are embracing the various asset inventory program and driving the risk-based prioritization program. Thank you so much.